Welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a long-time user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is episode 53 for November 2015. I am your host number one, Quinn Dunkey, and with me as always is co-host number two, Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
You know, show number 53, pretty soon our show's going to be able to apply for AARP membership if we keep this up.
That's true, yes. It's doing very well on its 401k.
How are you?
I am excellent. I'm looking forward to our interview, actually.
Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. A couple of my favorite games we're going to talk about.
Mine too. Why don't we roll right into that?
Okay. Well, that voice you heard is, in fact, David Schroeder. I hope I pronounced that right, David.
You bet.
Okay, and David, of course, is the author of Crisis Mountain. I think probably one of my all-time favorite Apple II games, and I enjoyed Dino Eggs very much as well. Hello, David. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Mike. Hello, Quinn. And it's great to be here. Great to talk with you.
So we'll start off with the question that we like to ask everybody who joins us. Tell us about your first experience with the Apple II.
Yeah, I'm gaining in my appreciation of what an amazing time that was and what an amazing machine it was. Looking back over my notes as I have been in the last several months, looking over my design notes for Crisis Mountain and Dino Eggs, it just comes full in the face in my memory, just how amazing that era was. I first had a chance to work with Apple IIs because that was the computer that the local computer lab in the Seattle Community College stocked. And, you know, at that point, I had become intrigued by seeing some of the coin-operated arcade games and just was blown away by the astounding month-by-month or sometimes even week-by-week progress in the sophistication of those games and opening up whole new worlds, Asteroids and Donkey Kong particularly, and other games, Battlezone. And so I thought, when I started seeing some home computer game ads in old computer game magazines that were starting to show up, they talked about all these machines and, you know, Texas Instruments and Atari 400 at the time was that machine, and the VIC-20. And, you know, I have to admit, if that Seattle Community College had stocked its computer lab with some other computer, would I have tried to write Crisis Mountain on that computer first? And I think the answer probably is yes. But fortunately, they stocked Apple IIs. And so I just immediately signed up for an independent study course. I couldn't afford one at that time to buy one. So I signed up for a community, kind of a lab course, an open-ended lab course, just to get access to this room full of apples. And that was the moment when I got my hands on it.
Yeah, I think that experience echoes a lot of us, honestly. We talk about that on the show, that, we're all sort of devout Apple II fans here, but how much of that is honestly just because that's the machine that our parents brought home, or that's the machine that our school had, or for whatever reason, that was the one that we had access to, and thus became subsequently obsessed with.
You know, I think that's a big part of it. All of us owe enormous debt in our lives to serendipity. However, it has to be said, too, that Apple was the computer that was aggressively talking to schools and aggressively talking with community colleges to make that and to make it financially possible for them to do that. So that was, indicative of their culture, which certainly at the time was not a kind of make a quick buck culture so much as it was a mixed culture. It was a richer culture, and that probably was why those Apple IIs were in the community college where I found them.
For sure, yeah, and I think the design of the Apple II has a lot to do with why we all kept using it, the expandability and flexibility of the architecture. Certainly if I had, started with a VIC-20 or something, I wouldn't have kept it for, 14 years as I did my Apple IIs, so I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
You're right, because then, when I began to basically try to recreate Donkey Kong on the screen of the Apple II, I didn't know from whatever, how to do it or how I could what language I needed to learn. I tried it in BASIC first because obviously there's the language right there ready to go, BASIC, and I quickly found out that that wasn't fast enough. So then I turned to these books that were there, and there's another little serendipity. There were these books, I think one of which probably did come with the apples, which would be the kind of machine code guide. But one of the Roger Wagner books was there too about assembly language and how to use his assembler. If the organizations didn't exist like Call APPLE and Roger Wagner's books and getting those into the community college, I don't know quite, again, what next step would I have taken. But the books were there, thank goodness. And the Call APPLE group was in the Seattle area. And so I had the resources fairly close at hand to teach myself what I needed to learn.
So let's talk about the games themselves. So for our listeners who may not know, of course, you're the author of Crisis Mountain and Dino Eggs, and as Mike and I said at the top of the show, those are both two of our favorite games. Can you talk? Let's start with Crisis Mountain. What was the genesis of that idea, and how did the development process kind of proceed?
Sure. Yeah, in Crisis Mountain, I have to admit, I was mainly trying to just kind of do Donkey Kong. Now, that isn't to say, I was aware that, I needed to make it my own game, and I think it did make it my own game. I'm very pleased with the whole concept of bombs in a volcano and the different qualities, regenerating the health of the little guy. One of the comments on a blog I'm doing on Gama Sutra, industry game site Gama Sutra, made the interesting point that he didn't know of any other computer games that early on, 1982, 1983, that had regenerating the concept of renewing health. Uh, and it's certainly true in the coin-operated games at that time. It was all or nothing. It was you're dead or alive. And then as games got more sophisticated, you could have injuries. But I don't know where I got the idea of you could actually heal yourself if you didn't run into another boulder thereafter. But I just mentioned that because all these little nuances get layered onto game concepts and make them richer. I was basically just trying to see if I could sort of do Donkey Kong. And everything, the way in which Crisis Mountain is different just seemed to come naturally out of a desire to use the tools that I had and put a little bit more variety and variation in it. But I was just kind of scrambling with Crisis Mountain to just get that feeling of that little guy on the screen in an interesting way. And the concepts just kind of came to me one at a time, working with the light pen. Again, that was another thing I was lucky was at the community college, a light pen system with a table. At that later on, I got a Gibson light pen where you could actually work on the screen itself. But at the community college, they had a light pen system where you were working on a desk surface, a portable table platform, and that was invaluable too to design the cavern backgrounds and to begin to understand the relationships between the X and Y coordinates of the pixels and the amazingly arcane way in which those map to the memory locations on the Apple screen.
Now, obviously, Crisis Mountain is a fairly sophisticated game. How long are we talking about for development here? Because we've heard Bob Bishop in the past talk about how he would sit down at 6 o'clock in the evening, and by 6 a.m. he had a working game, beginning to end. I assume you took a little bit longer than that.
I assure you, I'm no Bob Bishop in that regard. No, basically, each of my games from those years took about a year, and it was, I didn't really intend that or set out to do it that way. It just seemed that that's kind of what happened. So Crisis Mountain, then Dino Eggs, then Short Circuit, and then my set of Christmas games, which Random House published. in each case, it was pretty close to a year. And of course, the last few months of that year were a mixture of testing and polishing and going back and forth with the publisher, and also beginning to think about the next game. So there's overlap here, of course, but it was pretty. Most of these cases, it was pretty much a year.
Now, was it just you? Were you working solo, or did you have other people helping you out?
It was all me, and in fact, that's really why it feels like a golden age to me in hindsight. I had plenty of stresses at the time. I was hardly in nirvana at the time. I have a talent for making myself anxious no matter what's going on, lucky or not. I think a lot of people have that talent, but it was me, and the reason I look back on it as kind of a golden age was because that's kind of creatively who I am. I do work with other people. I'm not a recluse. I can work with other people, but I think I thrive on my own. And these were the days, and the days were short, but they were the days when a single person could, in fact, do every bit and every byte and every sound effect and everything. And those days went by quickly, and it wasn't long before you needed teams. And then in the mid and later 80s, I joined teams for other games. I was involved with an adaptation of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, actually, long before it was the household word that it is now, and other projects, including for America Online. But in those early years, it really was, you could sit in your attic and do the whole thing. And I just really enjoyed that. So it was me. And in my first game, I got tiny, tiny bits of feedback from the publisher. My second game, a little more feedback. But when you compare that to focus groups and beta testing and all the kind of stuff now, I mean, it's just hardly any feedback. It was just me trying to figure it out.
At what point, when you're developing Crisis Mountain, did you say to yourself, I think I might be able to sell this game, and then did you just start calling around publishers, or how did that happen?
It was pretty much like that, Mike. As I say, I first kind of started putting the ideas together by reading early computer magazines like Creative Computing and Byte. And it was those ads in those magazines that were, in many cases, very clearly taken out by individuals.
Sure.
And in many cases, they were selling individually recorded audio cassette tapes for those systems that took in, audio data, as some of them did in that day from cassette tapes. And they were selling things in sandwich bags, with Xeroxed instructions. And there were a few ads in the magazines in those days where there were companies, very early companies like Synergistic Software, Sierra Online, but they were clearly also very primitive. So I from the very beginning, I saw this as a possible way to make a living. And as Crisis Mountain took shape, I began contacting from the ads in the backs of the magazines, the ones that looked more organized, the companies that looked more organized. And Synergistic Software being in the Seattle area, that just kind of came together quickly because they responded quickly. And I liked Bob Clardy very much. He's also a great pioneer in the early computer game days. He wrote some very pivotal and seminal adventure games in the transition from text-based adventures to graphic-based adventures. So yeah, that was a great relationship that started fairly efficiently there.
So let me dig down into the sort of the technical aspects of Crisis Mountain a little bit. You mentioned earlier those blog posts on Gamasutra, and we'll link to those in the show notes. They're a great read. One of the things I really love about those blog posts is that you've got these amazing photos of your notes from the time, and they're just absolutely fascinating to stare at. Can you talk a little bit about kind of some of the technical details? I mean, whatever you can remember, obviously it was a long time ago, but some of the details of, like, say, the rendering of the terrain and the little guy and the collision detection and some of those things that, are relatively straightforward on, other platforms, but on the Apple II can be quite challenging.
Sure. Happy to do that, Quinn. And it's been a kind of a path of rediscovery for me too, because I look at my notes and I think, oh my God. Oh, that's right. I had to do that. And I remember parts of it, but then I look at the notes and I realize, my gosh, this is so detailed. So yeah, I think first off, to paint with a broad brush, I would say this, and a lot of your listeners probably know this, but just to kind of get it out there. Every pixel on the Apple screen was just that, an on-off pixel. There was no frame or knowledge or identification of that dot or any sort of intelligence with, is that part of an object, a background, a foreground, a moving thing? I mean, there's just none. It was just turn the dot on, turn the dot off. So anything you brought to it about collision detection, you did from scratch. Anything you did about foreground, background, those were effects that you needed to kind of deal with. Now, thank goodness the Apple had in it a page flipping system, because if it didn't have that, really very little of this would have been possible, or we'd have all gone blind from the flickering screens, I guess. I don't know. But that was absolutely key to the magic of changing the one high-res page address locations behind the scenes, so to speak, while the other of the two was the visible high-res memory location set. So that page flipping was key. But that collision detection was just keeping track of rectangles and just manually checking the lower left against the lower right of the other thing, and the upper left of the one thing to the lower left of the other thing. I mean, it was just manually, is this rectangle at all overlapping that rectangle? And again, nothing in the code knew what those rectangles meant. There was no visual reference. It was just those numerical values. In terms of the guy running around, yeah, I thought about that a lot. I thought, is there a way for me to have the code read the data on the screen so that, as the guy runs around, he could recognize, oh, this is a solid piece of solid ground. But the Apple graphics were not sophisticated enough or nuanced enough or with enough colors so that I could dedicate a kind of bit by bit signature in the graphics to make that possible. So I couldn't have, now you could have an invisible layer where there's nothing but, a line telling the character where to land if you wanted to do it that way. But there wasn't that resource. So the guy is checking, well, how do I explain this? A kind of matrix, a hand-built table with hand-defined widths of rows and depths of columns so that it knows kind of where it is in that matrix, and it knows how far left it can go before it needs to start paying attention to another segment of that matrix. And then when it's in a flat level ground, it knows, okay, I'm in this part of this long matrix, and I know now if I get farther left than this pixel or further right than that pixel, I know I have to go check the next segment or a different segment of the matrix. And it's all just hand tooled that way, segment by segment. What's the far left? What's the far right? And then within that matrix, is it flat? Is it going up to the 45 degrees to the right or 45 degrees up to the left? Or is it a tunnel where you can't stand up, you have to be crawling? So I just kind of defined, this table and what these different segments meant. And the little guy is checking that all the time about where he is.
That's really cool.
And so, on the Gama Sutra post, you see these notes where I am converting values back and forth between decimal and hexadecimal, because obviously the computer needs hexadecimal and I need to type them in because there's no tool to mediate for me. And but I need the decimal values so that I can keep track, in a way that I could understand and compute widths, lengths, total distances across the screen. So I had big sheets, oh gosh, 3 foot by 2 foot or something like that, of the whole background screen, very detailed. I mean, the thing I posted on Gama Sutra is just a subset of some of that, of just these big screens where I put in the hexadecimal values, corner by corner, edge by edge, surface by surface of what each, and then the boulders have their own system because they're all manually being told position by position where they can roll next and where they're branching, and if they're branching, where they can branch to. And that's a long string of data typed in by hand too. Every rock location is actually specifically typed in. There's no kind of concept of between. The guy has a concept of between these two values, do this. The rocks are hand point by point. And then if it was a larger rock, I had to do a delta where the rock was further off the ground, so there's like 3 or 4 pixels up further higher. And if they're smaller rocks, smaller. So yeah, it's a lot of numbers. A lot of numbers.
But at the same time, really efficient, right? I mean, then at runtime, you're just always doing lookups, and you're never calculating anything. You're never trying to, do elaborate physics or anything like
yes, that. Yeah, that was another part of the puzzle, because speed. And there's a certain laborious thing to all these tables, but as you say, that's the way you make it run faster. Because and also dealing with the addressing system of the high-res screen, I just flattened all those values out into tables, so that, again, I wasn't spending time thinking, now, how do I find the high byte of the next address of the next line down? I mean, that, then you get back to basic speed, which just wouldn't be fast enough to keep all the dots going.
For sure, yeah.
I remember seeing Crisis Mountain a lot on the shelves at Egghead Software and places like that, and getting pretty much universally positive reviews in the magazines and the trades of the time. Were you prepared for that sort of success? Were you expecting it to do well, or?
I was just so, was I expecting? I didn't know what to expect. We were just all making it up. We were making it up. Everyone was making it up. Nobody knew anything. Even the concept of what a computer game was just extremely fluid. And as I say in the one Gama Sutra post, from going from Crisis Mountain to Dino Eggs, just the whole concept of, well, how many different screens do there need to be in this thing? I don't know. Everyone's just, it's just like Hollywood. I mean, there's a hit movie that's of this genre, and then everyone starts copying it. That's the way it is. So everyone's trying to figure out how much quality needs to go, or what qualities need to go into these experiences. And everyone says, oh, this game was a hit. I think it was a hit because blah. Do that. It's just the same old thing. But particularly with Crisis Mountain, to answer your question, yeah, I just had no idea. I was so pleased to get an advance check. Really one of the happiest nights of my creative life, my kind of professional life, I guess you'd say. And I went out to dinner with my very best friend and my wife, and I've hardly ever been happier in my life. I was just so pleased and proud. And then when the royalties started coming in, I mean, it didn't make me filthy rich or anything, but it certainly was lovely. It made me feel much more comfortable than I had been in other attempts at making a living since graduating from college. So it was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And but being who I am, I just immediately thought, oh my gosh, now I have to do better.
And you went on to do Dino Eggs.
Went on to do Dino Eggs, and Miner 2049er came out right between those two, Crisis Mountain and Dino Eggs, and they had 10 different background screens, and that just blew everyone away, and it was a very popular game. So I really spent a lot of time figuring out how I could basically get as many background screens as possible, and that led to the creation of a screen generator routine for Dino Eggs, so that, well, there's essentially an infinite number of backgrounds available. And that was a big part of kind of the whole schema of Dino Eggs. And I still in Crisis Mountain did rely on some of the machine code draw routines in the upper memory locations of the ROM in the Apple. And I began weaning myself off of those as I went from Crisis Mountain to Dino Eggs, and relied more and more on my own bitmaps. And that sped things up too, even further, so that I was able to do things like the Dino Mom foot and just basically take even deeper control of the screen. And I just feel so fortunate with Dino Eggs that the screen, the energy on the screen, the elements of the screen just kind of came together. Everything fed into everything else. Everything interacted with everything else on the screen in an interesting way. And I have to say a big part of that is luck. Because when you make these decisions, how wide is Dino Eggs was more of a tile-based system. So how big is a tile? Wow. That decision is going to affect everything. Everything. It defines the whole granularity, the size, the scope, the scale, the speed of the whole game. But you have to make that decision really early. And you don't know how that's going to feed into character movement, interaction between creatures. And so a lot of it is luck. It's like you just have to move forward and make these decisions. I could have, if I decided to make the tiles in Dino Eggs, each ledge segment 2 bytes wide instead of 3 bytes wide, it could have been an entirely different game. It's just really hard to say.
That actually segues nicely into my next question, which, if we could talk a little bit about the game design depth that you had. I mean, Crisis Mountain was really well regarded in that way, and that there was a lot of different elements that interacted in interesting ways. But then in Dino Eggs, you really took that to the next level. I mean, for me personally, it was a seminal moment when I figured out that you could start a fire to scare away the Dino Mom. And there was just little interactions like that really all over that game that you gave it these sort of layers of depth. How did you, approach that? I mean, for that time period, that level of game design sophistication was quite unusual. Can you talk a bit about how you sort of came up with some of that stuff?
Yeah, it's layer at a time, and I knew I wanted the hero to rescue the dinosaurs from extinction. And I love the time travel thing of it being his fault, so that you're, motivated by guilt. Somehow that works for me. I grew up in the Midwest. What can I say? So that worked for me. I don't think I actually had hatching eggs at the very, very, very beginning. I just had eggs. And I think I was originally thinking of vertical spiders, vertically moving spiders, and horizontally moving roaches. And the roaches later kind of morphed into slower snakes and faster protopedes. But my original concept was that the spiders and the roaches would sort of be mirror images of each other in their movement, so that the spiders would start horizontal on the top and then come down vertically, as they do, and the roaches would come up vertically and then go horizontally, which they don't. They're only horizontal. That was one of the decisions along the way. I think the hatching eggs came to me pretty early. They had to have, because a lot of the game, of course, is the dino babies. but it wasn't right away. I have a lot of early sketches where there's no babies. And then, of course, I didn't think of the spiders abducting the little babies until I had babies. It just, I I seem to just gravitate toward more than one thing going on at a time in a way that just felt very fundamentally attractive to me. And some of the game reviews at the time made reference to that, saying, "Well, you can always tell a game by David Schroeder because you're juggling these several things at once. It's not linear. It's more of an environment where you're surrounded by factors." And I can't really say where that comes from. I guess it comes from deep in my psyche somewhere. It just and also, in terms of fundamental concepts, I don't like to shoot anything. I don't like shooting things. The fact that the primary model now for games is that you shoot everything that moves, I find frankly depressing. And I always wanted to save things. So all my games are about saving things. And that's just kind of deep down in my bones too. Layer by layer by layer, Dino Mom was definitely inspired by a short film by Mike Newland, Bambi versus Godzilla, which is a very well-known kind of 2-minute joke short film, animated film that film societies back in the day showed. And it's a hilarious movie. You probably just from the title and from my homage to it in Dino Eggs know exactly what happens in the movie, and you're right. And it was a great inspiration. It was a great joke, and I stole the idea. There's no question I stole it, but hopefully I made it my own as well. And I have known people who have played Dino Eggs for a long, long time before finding out how to keep the Dino Mom away.
Yeah, I think I was on that list, and we should say, for anyone who hasn't played the game or maybe has forgotten that, the Dino Mom foot is really, it's this amazing combination of surprise and comedy and sort of drama, if you will. It's people can picture the Monty Python foot, this giant foot that comes from above, and it's so much bigger than everything on the screen, and it's so it catches you by surprise because it's so sort of outside the paradigm of this tile-based world. That it's really a striking feature, and of course that it was rendered really effectively on an Apple II. It's not easy to make things that big, scroll smoothly down the screen like that. So can you talk a little bit about how your technology evolved in terms of collision detection again and rendering and so on from Crisis Mountain to to Dino Eggs being a tile-based system? Did that also, increase your sophistication in terms of how you're handling collisions and things?
The collisions, I don't think there was a way for those to get a lot different. It really was just rectangles. I think I might have gotten more sophisticated in storing all of the collision rectangles in a more kind of uniform way so that I could genericize that a bit more. But there wouldn't have been anything profoundly different in collision rectangles. There was certainly something, I got a lot more aggressive in Dino Eggs on self-modifying code because I just had to. I could not afford a 30-line routine for graphics to do this kind of logic with the graphics and a separate 30-line code for that logic of graphics. And when I say logic of graphics, I mean, you've got background screens, you've got the storage screens where your material is that you're pulling from that no one ever sees. And in Dino Eggs, there are two of those. There are two background screens full of stuff. And then you've got the two visible screens, only one visible at a time, of course. And you're with masks, there's an and process where you're masking out so that you can see dots around a moving figure like Time Master Tim, not through him, but around him, and you don't just have a solid rectangle of blanked out area around the moving character. So that's kind of an and logic. There's or logic. There's all these layers of where's it coming from, what are you doing to the bits and bytes, and then where's it going to? And if I had a separate graphic routine for every variation of and, or, and sequences of ands, ors, and froms and tos, I'd have no room for anything else. So I had to kind of genericize my graphic routines, and then before I call the routine, I just poke a couple of bytes ahead to tell to set certain opcodes and from and to locations. And then even those became genericized, so that if I knew I needed to go from page 3 to page 1, I would call the routine with that little pre-routine to set the self-modifying a code ahead to the from and to, so that I didn't have to write 18 different versions of that from page 3 to page 1 routine. So it was just step by step finding ways to double use, triple use, quadruple use these layers of self-modifying code to keep the graphic routines as fast as possible. Though I suppose you could argue that self-modifying code isn't as fast as possible, because you are giving up a tiny bit of speed for the use of RAM, for a more efficient use of RAM, which of course I had to do because I had to fit the game into 48K.
Yeah, we like to say on the show that self-modifying code is the cause of and solution to all problems.
Well, it was one of those kind of amazing moments, and there were several. We take it now for granted. You grow up with computers. But these ideas in the very beginning, it just like, this stuff I'm doing in this box can disappear in a split second. Can just go. It's gone. And, we know now, everyone grows up with this stuff. So, memory, back up your this, or backup power outage. I mean, we all just kind of know that landscape. But that was completely new. It's like, what? Oh, I just turned off the computer and I just lost what I did? It was a totally new concept. And the whole idea of what to do about it took some time to figure out, because there weren't the support systems for helping people to figure it out. And then too, as I say in the one blog post, there's really no such thing as a random number. When I found out that all the computers were just kind of, making their own little thing that gave you an unpredictable number that you could, experience as a random number, but it wasn't actually random. That was like a metaphysical curtain opening for me. It was amazing. And similarly, this self-modifying code, it really is. It's like a road paving machine that is literally laying the bricks in the road ahead for itself before it travels that road. And it's really bizarre when you think about it. But you can actually make it work.
So from Dino Eggs, then you went on to Short Circuit. Can you talk about that, the inspiration behind that game, and maybe some of the programming challenges? And because as you're developing these games, you're getting better and better and more sophisticated with your techniques.
I hope so. I think so. Yeah. It's really interesting because that whole thing about getting Dino Eggs more than 2 backgrounds then, caused me to make the screen generator routine with totally random backgrounds for Dino Eggs. In a way, Short Circuit, then the pendulum in my mind swung back the other way, because I love Dino Eggs. I'm very proud of it. I'm also aware that even though there are infinite numbers of background screens, they sort of, in a way, are alike too. There's sort of a trade-off. The more random things get, the more generic they get too. So I decided with Short Circuit to make the pendulum swing back the other way a little bit, and I designed 12 very distinct, unique backgrounds from scratch that had the advantages of fully designing the background pixel by pixel, but then had enough generic gameplay similarity from screen to screen so that you were playing the same game and could enjoy it. So that was a big part of Short Circuit. Another big part of it graphically was, with the limitations of the Apple II graphics, it just felt to me like using gray was a pretty powerful way to get the most out of the screen as you could. So it all became kind of, and this was before Tron, but it all became kind of digital circuit board kind of inspired feeling on the screen with a lot of the Apple II gray mesh where the pixels are every other pixel odd on one line and every other pixel even on the next line. And then you got a gray out of that. And that gave me a kind of a hard-edged metallic look to the screen that I liked a lot and kind of inspired the whole concept of that game where you're inside a computer chip and trying to prevent the chip from triggering an explosion. So in a way, it's... Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to interject that that Short Circuit is actually probably on my top 3 list of favorite Apple II games of all time. And
yeah, mine too.
Yeah, I mean, it's right up there with Loadrunner and Choplifter for me. And one of the reasons is exactly as you say, that handcrafted variety really shows. I mean, it had this sort of drive to, you were driven to keep playing further because you wanted to see what crazy new, mini puzzle or mini kind of new gameplay mechanic was going to be on the next screen. And it still felt like a cohesive game. So did you find it took a lot longer to develop that level of handcrafted variety in a game, or by that time did you kind of have it down?
Well, it was the same year as my other games were, and I think you guys are. I appreciate you guys kind of putting the spotlight on. I got better. I appreciate that. It's a compliment, and it's true. I think I was able to, through the experience of my first 2 games, to hone in very efficiently on how to make each level of Short Circuit enough the same and enough different. I really like that rhythm. I also write music, and I really think of it as kind of another application of musical rhythm, of what's the same and what's different. Because after all, every experience, theatrical experience, movie experience, music experience, game experience, is just kind of varying that mixture of familiarity and surprise and the new. So I think I kind of approached Short Circuit, I was able to approach it kind of holistically and say, I want 12 screens, and here's how I can parcel out. Here's the universe of diversity that's needed to make those 12 screens both cohesive and distinct. And I really remember it as a pretty straightforward process of designing the kind of phenomena and the variations of those phenomena, and then enjoying the pleasure of parceling those out amongst the 12 screens. And I know I did have some screens I threw out because it either repeated something that an earlier screen did enough, or I said, oh, the only thing this new screen is adding is that this type of photon or neutron is behaving in this way. I can just put that in an earlier screen and make this new screen into something totally different. So it was that kind of a enjoyable parceling out kind of planning amongst the 12 screens. And then I really like that I give you a chance to not necessarily do them in order. I forget exactly what the logic is, but there's some way you can, if you succeed on each screen in a certain way, you get access to the next 2 screens or the next 2 chips, so that it's not a railroad, it's not a train track thing. Didn't I do that? You guys tell me.
Yeah.
Isn't there a way in
Yeah.
there so you have a way to choose how you go forward a little bit?
Yeah, there is there. And that's really something that sets, I think, your games apart as well, is that you've got a lot of these kind of early game design type elements that we don't really see commonly until much, much later. You talked about the regenerating health and the fact that, shooting isn't the primary mechanic, and, out of order, mission selection, and, these sorts of things that even modern games rarely do. And I think it shows you have that sort of feel for game design as well as programming, which is pretty unusual these days.
Well, thank you. I when the one person in the comment on Gama Sutra did say about the regenerating health, I posted a reply and I said, folks, chime in, let me know other games at that time that had regenerating health, because, I can't really do the research myself, but I'm really curious. I'm really curious if I sort of made that up. I mean, obviously other game forms, card games and other things had that concept, and stories and books have that concept, but I kind of wonder, where did I get that from? Or maybe did I kind of make it up? And another little sidebar in the same theme would be, as far as I know, Dino Eggs is the first home computer game to be modded. And by that, I don't just mean somebody hacked away at it in his attic. I mean, they did that with a concept and then distributed it. And there was a version of Dino Eggs called Dino Smurf, which was done. And about 10% of the people who contact me about Dino Eggs first encountered the game as Dino Smurf. And a small portion of those people never even knew that it was Dino Eggs. They thought it was a game called, originally written as Dino Smurf. So I haven't heard of another home computer game that was modded and, as I say, distributed as such before Dino Eggs. So that's a bit of an odd footnote there too.
Yeah, we should mention that we do an unusual or weird games segment on the show sometimes. And we had previously talked about the first game in that trilogy, Castle Smurfenstein.
There you go.
So it's really great to be hearing about Volume 2 Dino Smurf. Now, how did you find out about Dino Smurf and Smurf Butcher Bob?
Yeah, just word of mouth. And I don't remember even what year it was. I have since been in touch with the fellows who did it. Actually several times over the years, just because it's so much fun. I sometimes hear about it and I forward some email I get to them. But it was Andrew Johnson and Preston Nevins, and they called themselves Dead Smurf Software. And I believe Castle Smurfenstein was the first one they started working on, but Dino Smurf was the first one that got out. I'm not sure, but I don't remember the year. I know it was at least a few years after Dino Eggs came out, and it was just, again, this is before the internet, so it was just kind of a random thing that somebody showed it to me or mentioned it to me, and at first I had no idea what they were talking about, and then somebody sent me a copy, but it was probably the late 80s when I first heard about it, and then with the email and internet over the years, I've been able to see, as I say, quantitatively, kind of how many people encountered Dino Eggs in that way.
Yeah, what's interesting about both of those things, the regenerating health and the modding, is that they're both very distinctive features of computer gaming. They're areas where computer gaming expanded the genre of gaming in ways that arcades couldn't, because of course, A, you don't have access to any part of the game, and B, because of course they're just trying to take your quarters, so they would never do regenerating health. And whereas computer gaming, the value proposition shifts to where you're trying to give the best experience possible for as long as possible. And again, I think your games are some of the earliest ones I remember that sort of leverage the advantages of computer gaming versus just trying to, clone or copy arcade games. Although ironically, I guess Crisis Mountain started as a Donkey Kong clone. It's funny where it ended up.
Well, that's where everything started. I mean, you look back in hindsight, and it is the nature of hindsight to look at what happened as somehow inevitable. And it is the pleasure of a true lover of history to go back and refresh yourself and kind of slap yourself in the face and say, no, it was not inevitable. B came from A and C came from B. And Yeah, as I say, nobody knew anything. We were all making it up as we went along. Um, it was individual people like me and many others like me stretching what these experiences could be. And even calling them games, of course, becomes inadequate very soon in those years because we're talking simulations. We're talking role-playing adventures that really aren't so much of a game as a new type of storytelling or a new type of book. So it just, yeah, boundaries were being trumped across and broken in all directions, and that was the part of the excitement of those years, of course.
Now, from Dino Egg, or from Short Circuit rather, you then sort of went off in a different direction with a series of family Christmas games. Ho ho ho! Can you talk about
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Random House published those, and they clearly aren't as well known as the other games, though. By gosh, I love them. I think they're just cute as all get out, and I'm very pleased with those as well. The distinctive thing there is that I really felt it was time to go miniature. Uh, so it's a set of games. It's a set of 5 games, and you can play them one at a time or in a sequence. And I really tried, each of the 5 games isn't as deep or complex as Short Circuit or Dino Eggs, but I would say I'm kind of looking at the box as the package as I say this. I hadn't ever really thought about it this way before, but I would say each of the 5 Christmas games is head and shoulders more complex than Crisis Mountain um, in game sophistication and detail. So I'm very pleased with them. And Random House was kind of stumbling its way into the computer software arena, and I think the challenge of selling a seasonal game was particularly difficult because the Apple II, in just a year or so would sort of not be on the front burner of publishers' plans anymore. So it was a very brief golden age, and God bless them, they paid me my advance, but they were not able to sell very many of them.
Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about before we sort of jump forward a little bit in your timeline, and that's that you also did the music, the art. You did the music and the artwork for War in Middle Earth. Now, how is that switching from doing coding to perhaps a different type of creativity?
Yes, great question. I there are several layers to that. Um, One is there's great pleasure in the new machines, particularly in the case of the Amiga, where there's just all these colors and just all these new amazing things to deal with, and musically as well. You can actually play music while other things are going on. What a concept! Um, so certainly on just kind of a visceral level of toys to play with, that's a good thing. In terms of making a living, um, boy, I really liked that rhythm of one time a year, kind of going and finding a publisher, and then the rest of the year, more or less, I get to do creative stuff. Um, I really liked that, and that era was over. Games were becoming so complex that I couldn't do it all myself anymore, and yeah, so it was a new challenge for me to kind of network. Also develop skills with the new machines like the PC and the Amiga and Commodore 64, and just see where I fit in the puzzle. And I was able to do, as you say, the graphics and music for War in Middle Earth, for Synergistic Software, who was a subcontractor of Melbourne House. And then for First Star Software, they had the Rockford Boulder Dash franchise, and I was able to do some really creative background kind of icon sets for that game, which I'm very pleased with. And I worked with Fernando Herrera who was also an early pioneer in games in that era. He was kind of program manager on the Boulder Dash Rockford line at that time. So, there are certainly pleasures there, but also, more stress kind of on just a business and making a living standpoint.
How did that sort of lateral move and creativity come about? Did you go to Synergistic saying, I want to do something different, and they suggested this, or what happened there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had designed birthday games very similar in concept to the Christmas games in terms of scope and style, but celebrating birthdays instead of Christmas. So, of course, a publisher could sell the game all year long. But Random House did not have a good experience with the Christmas games, and so I couldn't find a publisher for the birthday games. Though, as a footnote, the birthday games did get published in Soft Disc magazine, the monthly disc-based magazine that published actually a number of my games, or republished them after they kind of went out of circulation from their original publisher, because I kept all the rights to my games. And I have to thank John Romero. For that, because he was worked with Soft Disc. It was a different era. Just 3 or 4 years in the golden years, and then 3 or 4 or 5 years of more piecemeal work. I even did some adaptations, a port. I didn't do many ports, but there was a port of a TV game show I did at the time that a fellow got me the job. I think what you had asked me there, Mike, was kind of how did some of these first freelance jobs kind of happen?
Right.
And it really was serendipity. I did talk to Synergistic Software. I did talk to the agent who helped sell my Christmas games to Random House, and it really was kind of networking, long before we had the tools we have now to network. And it really was like knocking on doors, except you were knocking on phone numbers and knocking on very, very, very early email addresses. But I even did a port of a TV game show called Wipeout. And in fact, that was right before the Apple II market really collapsed. And I have to say, I wish the Apple II as a kind of primary publishing platform had held on for just another year or two, because that was the per hour of my time, that was enormously lucrative, because I just knew the Apple inside and out, and they gave me this code and they gave me these graphics from, I don't know, the Commodore 64 or something, and I just slammed it together so quickly. I felt like Bob Bishop, let me put it that way. But then as soon as I finished this one contract for this one game, and it was paid pretty well based on the 2 or 3 months it took me to do it, boom, the rug fell out, was pulled out from under the Apple II market. And so yeah, it was more scrap and piecemeal, and not as fun. I mean, it was fun in the sense they were cool new tools, but as I said before, just somehow I'm built so that collaboration is okay. I can do it, but I just don't thrive in teams and committees as well. Though I did enjoy writing music that didn't have to be, parceled between all the other things that the 6502 chip had to do. So that was a pleasure. But it was more scrappy and piecemeal. But I'm happy overall to say that I made my living at Home Computer Games for 9 years, and I'm very, very pleased with that. It was a very special time.
Yeah, not many people can say that.
That's true.
That's true, and yeah, I was happy, very, very pleased and happy to have been invited to an Apple II reunion a reunion given by John Romero and his wife Brenda Romero down in Silicon Valley. And I had dealt with some of the people who were there at the party, including John before, but had not met in person any of them at all. So it really I am sort of an introvert, so I had to kind of push myself to go to this event, but I'm so glad I did. And I really got a sense what you were saying there about how rare it was to have continuity not just in computers, but in computer games, and all of these different life stories of all these people who intersected in those early and mid 1980s with this amazing machine, and then went on to do other things in other ways, for other people in the years since. But we all were inspired or our lives transformed by that machine, and it's really was a great experience being at that event, and very pleased to meet a lot of those people. And was struck too that I was actually one of the older people there. I was not the oldest person there, but I was 2 or 3 years out of college when it happened. And many, many, many other people were in college or in high school or even earlier. So it really struck me. It had never occurred to me that I might be one of the older people who kind of meshed with the Apple II in that way, but I was toward the older end, so it was really remarkable.
Yeah, we've talked a bit about that on the show, actually, like the fellow that wrote Infiltrator, a very successful Apple II game. He was 16 when he wrote it, and so Mike and I have bemoaned that we can no longer use the excuse of having been too young during that golden age of Apple games to have participated.
Well, it really, hearing the stories and sharing stories, yeah, it does have kind of this feeling to it, kind of like in the movie Close Encounters, where people they're just kind of drawn. It's like all the characters in Close Encounters of the Third Kind are just kind of mystically touched by these aliens and drawn to Devil's Tower in Montana. And, there's sort of a feeling like that at this Apple II reunion, where it's like where you found it, what you felt about it. And as you were saying earlier, Quinn, the randomness of your parents giving you one for Christmas or something, and boom, things just start happening. Quite amazing, quite amazing.
So were you in your dining room then making mashed potato models of Crisis Mountain and Dino Eggs?
Yeah, and yelling at my kids and throwing garden plants and bushes out the window, and oh my heavens. No, I may have been a bit obsessed, but not quite that bad.
Now then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we should jump ahead to a little closer to the present now. Dino Eggs is making kind of a comeback in modern platforms. Can you talk a little bit about that?
30 years later, yeah.
Yes, I'm very, very, very pleased with the game, Dino Eggs Rebirth. It has its own website. That's the address, dinoeggsrebirth.com. And I hope people will check it out. We are going to release the game pretty soon. We're trying to get on Steam through Steam Greenlight, and I've had great pleasure working with this programmer, Eric Ferreau, who is one of the best Dino Eggs players in the world. And he contacted me about 4 years or so ago, as a number of people have over the years, saying, can I write a new version of the game? I've probably had 6 or 8 people ask me that. And in most cases, it's a hobby, and they just want to talk to me or ask me a few questions about things. And I always say, yes, you certainly can, but if you want to sell it or something, let me know and we'll talk about it. And it's, as I say, this has happened a number of times over the years. But I checked what Eric had done after he contacted me. He did a really fun variation on the game he called Dino Legs, which is this kind of a tongue-in-cheek reference to the original game. And I really liked the new energy he brought to it. He stayed true to the game in certain core ways that I felt were very important, and expanded it in other ways that were very exciting. And so I said, do you want to work together and we sell this thing? And he said yes. And he's got a day job, so good for him. He's thinking he's a practical fellow. But we've had great fun exchanging just endless emails and Skype calls over the last couple years, fleshing out the game in a way that feels true to the original and is vastly expanded, which is quite a trick. It is quite a trick, because you start pulling the thread of the original fabric, and you don't have to pull too many different threads before the fabric falls apart. So it's really amazing. There's just endless ways you could make a new Dino Eggs. in what way do you mean new? In what way do you mean bigger? In what way do you mean better? And we may not have come up with the perfect answers to those questions, but we came up with a set of answers that we're excited about and that people who've seen the preview version of the game are excited about as well. So I'm very pleased with it. It's got 40 skill levels of arcade action on a bigger screen with a bigger, broader tile system. Pretty much everything in the original game, there's just more variations of them. There are new kinds of boulders. There are boulders that can fall from the sky. There are types of boulders that form the structure of the cliff itself, so that as you kick over boulders, you're actually changing the structure of the screen layout. There's new types of baby dinos, of course. There are flying baby dinos. There are new types of fires. There you can be more than one Dino Mom at the same time. You can interact with Dino Mom in new surprising ways that I'll just leave it at that. And there are new ways you can climb spider threads, kind of double jump on spider threads to get around the screen quicker. So there's just a lot of things, and there's multiplayer. So there's just a lot of new features to the game that we've had a heck of a lot of fun coming up with. And the game is Windows and Mac OS and Linux. And yeah, we're hoping maybe we can take it further into the future and come up with a construction kit for folks and different things like that. But we're trying to get on Steam for now, and we're trying to get the game out hopefully in a few weeks here. As we record this, it's early November, hopefully in time for the holidays. But we're just trying to navigate today's very, 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 very difficult, complex, crowded game marketplace and find our niche in there and please some fans of the game.
That's awesome. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes, of course.
Thank you.
One of the common things to do today when you're you'd mentioned your partners need to maintain a day job and things like that. It seems like one of the common ways to go for indie game development these days is through like a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter or something like that.
Yeah.
But it looks like you didn't do that. Was that intentional or?
Yeah, I've reached out for help in a variety of ways, and I've gotten some help from fans of the original game who are themselves in the game industry now. And in fact, one of the great pleasures over the years of getting email from fans of the game are a subset of those emails where they say, your game is one of the games that inspired me to become a computer programmer or to become a game designer. And that's just very, very lovely to hear. So, I've done my networking, and I don't rule out some sort of Kickstarter thing for the future, but I just felt the way to play this was to take advantage of the fact that for Eric, the programmer, it was already a moonlighting kind of thing, and I was in the position where I did not need immediate financial support to participate, and I just felt like that was kind of one of our strengths, and just keep it lean and mean and go for the pleasure of doing it, and not kind of get in deeper with bigger budgets and things. Having said that, I'm very open to that possibility, because I think there could be multiple kind of revisions and reinterpretations of my early games, Dino Eggs among them, the other games as well. And so I'm certainly open to the Kickstarter avenue, but again, it just depends on the partnership, the game concept, and what's best for that game. I'm finding, to be honest, at the age of 60, I'm finding the socialization that's needed to publicize Dino Eggs Rebirth a challenge. I'm doing it, but it doesn't come natural to me. I don't come from a generation where I think in terms of posting and sharing and tweeting and all of this kind of viral stuff. So it's a challenge for me just to get the word out on this game as it is, let alone involve the financial process in that kind of social networking. So, like I say, I don't rule anything out, but in terms of this first game, this one revival game or this first revival game, it just seemed like it was best to keep it simple and just concentrate on the creative aspects, and that's what we've done.
Well, coming on this show should definitely help. I'm sure both of our listeners will run out and grab that game.
That's at least 2 copies you've sold tonight.
Well, I appreciate it. It's a great, great pleasure. And yes, I certainly hope people will visit the website and spread the word. And if they feel motivated to do so, vote on Steam Greenlight and get on our email list, because the people on the email list from the website will get heads up on the first release, hopefully, like I say, before the holidays. So I encourage people to do that, and I appreciate your help.
Now, what is this buy a prehistoric artifact thing that I'm seeing here?
I'm thinking of doing T-shirts. I haven't designed them yet, but I'm hoping at some point I have time to expand our offerings, because I would love to have a T-shirt with a screen dump, a screen capture, pixel for pixel true to the original game, with Dino Mom coming down on top of Time Mr. Tim's head, and then the caption underneath the screen jump pixels would be, Dino Mom is not pleased. and we'll see if I get around to doing that, and if I do it, if people will buy it. But I've also thought about autographing and selling some of the original source code printouts of my game. I don't know. I know people love the game. I know people have said many nice things to me. I don't know if that's worth $30 to people or $25 to people or whatever. So I'm happy for your input on that, or other people's input if they respond to this program. But I'm thinking of taking the original printout of the game with the source code, which is commented in hand-drawn pencil at the time, and with authentic side perforated pin feed paper, and autographing them and seeing if people are interested in having those as I say, a prehistoric artifact for a few bucks.
I'd buy a page or 2 of that.
Me too.
I thought of part of me says, oh, is that selling out, or am I just? And then I saw Steve Wozniak has a whole website, Woz signs things.
Yeah,
Sure
Signed by Woz.com or whatever he calls it. And I said, okay, well, if Woz can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, he'll sign a grapefruit if you send it to him.
That's right.
Well, maybe I will too. We'll see. We'll see how far I go on it.
Now, I had one more question for you. Given that we're 30 some years down the road, and the focus of the Apple II hobbyists these days has turned towards a lot of efforts to preserve old software and preserve documentation, and copyright sometimes comes up as a sticking point for whether we can turn, scan a manual and put it online, for example, or make a disk image. How would you feel about, us taking the disk images of your old games, the old Apple II versions, and making them available for people to download and use in emulators, or turn into disks again at the other end and play on their Apple IIs?
Well, I appreciate your asking very much, because, not surprisingly, many people haven't asked or don't ask.
Yeah.
And it's just out there all over the place. I mean, I hear from people all the time who say, oh, what a great game. I literally play it a little bit every night or once a week, or, and this is current, this is now.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if I keep up a relationship with them, then, a little while later, they will sheepishly admit, I never actually did buy the game, even 30 years ago. It's not just now because of the emulators and online, when, of course, like everything else online, you can find it somewhere for free. But even 30 years ago, they will sheepishly say, even in the beginning, I didn't actually buy it. So part of my motivation for the T-shirts and the autographs is, to give people a place to play out their guilt and to seek absolution for their guilty conscience. I would say, to answer your question, yes, certainly the materials are shared and can be shared. And the way you can show concern for the original copyright would be to include with it the original copyright and a reference to not only my name and the original copyright, but to my website. And in the case of Dino Eggs, any sort of mention you could make of the new game in existence to accompany the old game, of course, would be very welcome and appropriate. I'm delighted that people play my games even now. Of course, do I dream if I had a nickel for every time they did so? Yeah, that's a lovely thought. But I have to live in the real world, and so if credit is given and acknowledgement and links to appropriate new game or websites accompany it, then I have no problem with that. But I certainly appreciate your asking.
Well, that's great news. Thank you very much for making that available to us.
Yeah, and thank you very much for being on the show with us.
Yeah, I'll just throw in one more thing. What I'd love to do sometime if I had time would be go back to the 6502 code and come up with actual Apple II disk image special editions.
Okay.
Just kind of revisit it, flesh it out a little bit, add a little bit here and there, put in one or two little tweaks that make it special and make it my own, and maybe even sell those disk images now for $2 or something for the emulators, so that you could actually play a kind of a authentic, non-hacked author's edition of the old game. I don't know if I'll get around to doing that, but that's kind of in the back of my mind as something that would be a heck of a lot of fun to do.
Well, we'd have a heck of a lot of fun playing it.
For sure. That's a great idea.
That's great.
David, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Well, it's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, really appreciate your time.
Yes, indeed. You, and thank you to you and both of your listeners. No, thanks so much.
I'm Ben Heck, and you're listening to the Open Apple Podcast.
All right, Quinn, that was a great interview that we had with David. David, again, thank you for coming on and talking about your awesome games. And I hope Dino Eggs, the Rebirth, sells 1 million copies or 2 million or whatever you're looking for.
Yes, like we said, both our listeners go out and buy it as soon as it's available, because it's going to be awesome.
1 million times each.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, that was great. That was great.
We do have some news, don't we, Quinn?
We do, yeah. Why don't we roll right into that?
It may be old, but there's still news. Apple II news.
All right, so what's up first?
Well, 8-Bit Weapon is in the news again, as we often like to discuss their exploits. And for any of our listeners who are hardcore gamers, as myself am indeed, and if you are, you're looking forward to Fallout 4. And so 8-Bit Weapon has done a bit of a tribute to Fallout 4, and they're calling it Fallout 84. And it's kind of a visualization of what Fallout 4 might have looked like if it had come out on the Apple II. And it's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, as with most things, well, everything so far that I've seen from 8-Bit Weapon and Seth and Compute Her, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and you might be saying to yourself, well, Fallout did come out on the Apple II. It was called Wasteland, and it was awesome.
That's right.
This is more like if it came out in its present form on the Apple II, what would it look like, with assuming some sort of magical Apple II that could drive all of the technology that's in a modern AAA console game, but limited in graphics and sound. So it's fun.
I saw someone tongue-in-cheek on Twitter yesterday or today complaining that they were being tortured because they were able to download Fallout 4 from Steam, but they can't play it yet. So it's sitting there on their hard drive just waiting.
Yeah, modern gamers often have this kind of thing where, the publishers have to control the release dates, but there's so many different ways to get the games that, they do things like they lock you out of the servers, and the server is required to play, or all these other weird things. So Steam is like that as well, where you can download the game before it's legally been released, so you're not allowed to play it yet. It's very strange.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good idea because it saves their servers from crashing from overload from gamers trying to download it at 12:01 on a certain day. So
yeah,
if you pre-buy it, then you can preload it and it's downloaded a few hundred copies at a time or whatever the buy rate is, and instead of being slammed. So
Yeah, it's actually quite smart. But this is not a console gaming podcast or
What?
a modern gaming podcast.
This isn't Final Fantasy talk or whatever.
Nope, and it's also not a sports podcast. And yet we're going to talk about ESPN. What's going on here, Mike?
Yeah, so this is sort of an interesting little mini documentary. It's only about 11 minutes long, and it's called the Blue Box documentary. And it's put out by 538. That's all one word.com, which I think is it's a documentary film production company, but they're owned by ESPN, but I don't know that ESPN really has a whole lot to do with them other than when they bought 538, they said, you will also do sports documentaries sometimes. So when you go to their webpage, you'll see a bunch of sports documentaries. But this one is particularly fascinating. It's only, like I said, it's about 11, 12 minutes long. It almost feels like a preview to a larger movie, but it's not. There's a lot of stuff packed into that 11 minutes. They interview Woz. They have some footage, stock footage, or what do they call that? The footage from Jobs when he was alive talking about it, as well as John... I think his name is Lapsley. Is that right? He wrote a book on the history of phone phreaking and the phone companies, which is fascinating. You should buy it and read it. But yeah, it's a neat little piece, and they talk especially about one thing that we actually don't talk too much or haven't talked too much about on this show, but is often mentioned as sort of the founding document for Apple before there was Apple, was the 1971 Esquire magazine article called "The Secrets of the Little Blue Box" that Steve Wozniak stumbled across, and he ran over to Jobs' house, and they read it together, and they were reading it, and they said, there's a lot of stuff in here that's too specific to be fiction. Let's go try it, and that's how that inspired them to build blue boxes, and they sold them for money, and that kind of went, I guess, to help fund startup Apple.
Yep, Apple before it was Apple. They were hooligans.
That's right. So check it out. It's probably shorter than the time it took me to talk about it, but
that's okay. Let's see. We got some new hardware here from Ultimate Micro. The new 8 megabyte RAM cards for the 2GS are now available. And 8 megabytes is a fairly astonishing number for a 2GS. My own 2GS has 1.25 megabytes of original 1986 RAM in it. And I thought I was a pretty big deal back in the day, but nope. Turns out I was only 1/7 of a big deal, because to be a big deal these days, you got to have 8 megabytes. But this is a really awesome card, and we'll link to that where you can buy it. And as we've said in the past, if you want something like this, go buy it now, because it's not going to be available for long, and then you'll be sad because you won't have 8 megabytes, and you won't be a big deal. You'll only be 1/7 of a big deal like me. And there's also Dagan Brock has been one of the beta testers for this device, and he's posted a video of testing it on his 2GS. So we'll link to that for the heck of it, because why not?
It's $250 from the Ultimate Micro store, or there's a few listed on eBay for $279. So I guess if you're one of the insiders and you know about their web page, you can go buy it there for a little bit cheaper.
All right. Well, if there was an award for most persistent Apple II publication, in the sense of never quite giving up, despite every time we think it's gone, not to interfere with JuiceGS's record as the only continuously published magazine, but if there's a record for longest intermittently published magazine, I guess that goes to Call Apple.
Yeah, so Brian Weiser and Bill Martins, both of whom have been on the show in the past, so I guess they're friends of the show, have announced that that Call Apple has returned once again. It ran from 1978 to 1990 under Val Golding's stewardship, and then Bill Martins published it from 2002 to 2010, and now it's back. It is a PDF only format, so and it's free, but it's part of their membership package. So you have to be a member of the Call Apple user group, and then you'll get access to download the PDFs. And looks like number 1 is available now. I'm not a member, so I'm not sure, but if it's not, then it will be shortly.
Very cool. Good to see that back. Well, that wraps up probably the weirdest news segment that we've done. As you can probably tell, Mike and I are jamming this in here between other life demands, but we're determined to get it done.
Well, we cut it a little bit short because we have a ton of user feedback this month.
That we do. Let's jump right into that.
You've listened to us talk. Now it's time to tell us what you think.
Well, the GEOS non-contest, non-test maybe?
Non-test, I like
let's
that.
roll with that. The GEOS non-test generated quite a bit of feedback, and gosh, what would have happened if we'd actually offered a real prize?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I guess we did offer a prize of sorts, which was who can find the secret phrase in the GEOS disk image that we linked to last month. And we have a couple of winners. I'm going to say first the official winner was listener Jorma, who I believe is from, I'm going to guess, Finland. Yes, I guessed it right, from Finland. He was the first person to win legitimately, and the secret phrase, for those of you who haven't already figured out, was, of course, Buatari. And now I say that Jorma was the first official winner because he did it legitimately. He loaded up the disk image and found the secret phrase in it. Unofficially, I have to say, Kevin Savitz was the winner because he actually, as soon as the episode was posted, he actually replied on Facebook, I don't even have to launch the disk image. I know the secret phrase is Buatari. And I guess I'm getting predictable in my old age because he was quite correct. But he is disqualified for not having done the official disk image loading process.
Boo Kevin.
Yes, boo Kevin Savitz. No, yay Kevin Savitz, because he's awesome. All right, so let's see. We got lots and lots of feedback here. We've been piloting up a little bit. Let's see. I'm going to read one from listener Tony, who says, sad day has come upon me. I've finished listening to all the back episodes of Open Apple. Well, lucky for you, we've been making them longer and longer, so you'll have much more to listen to shortly. He says, while listening to Open Apple 14 and 15, Jordan Mechner's name came up several times. Has he been a guest on Open Apple? I don't think so, Mike. Has he?
He is not.
Okay, well, we'll see what we can do about that. There's certain dignitaries that we would very much like to have on the show. Jordan Mechner, of course. Bill Budge is another. But some of these people are hard to track down and or have no interest in talking to us.
Exactly. There's certain there's a bit of a caste system, I would say, and there are, when you reach above your social standing, they tend to smack you down and just ignore you or say no. And I think Mechner might be a little bit beyond our stratospheric reach, but we'll try.
Yep. Yeah, that's something that never hurts to try. So we'll see if our people can contact his people and maybe do lunch. All right, so let's see. I'm going to skip over lots of people talking about show length. We, as we've said before, we have about 50-50 split. People who think it's just fine and people who think it's too long. We are trying to tighten it up a little bit. I guess I should speak to that. So last month was our first attempt to tighten up the show, and it came in at about 2 hours and 40 minutes, I think. And trust me when I say we did you a favor for those of you who wanted a shorter show, because we cut out more than half of the news items, and it still came out at that length. So what can we say? Mike and I just love talking Apple II. Hard to shut us up.
Well, there's always the option of just simply becoming purely an interview show and dropping the news altogether. We could do that.
Like we said last month, I think what we can bring to the community is a little more in-depth discussion of the news. So we like talking about this stuff. All right, so skipping around a little bit here, we got one from listener Alex who says, how about an interview with 4am? If he or she does not want to reveal their voice, we could transcribe what they say and run it through a mockingbird, which is a funny idea. I like that. So we've joked about this in the past, maybe having 4am on in some sort of capacity, perhaps an email interview that Mike and I just read to each other or something. But 4am has declined our generous offer to be on the show. However, Juice to GS will be doing a written interview with 4am, so you can catch up on that when that comes out.
Tonight, the role of 4am will be played by Quinn Dunkey.
That's right. I hack you good.
More and more people turning us down for interviews. That's great for our
Yeah,
self-esteem.
this is going great. In a couple of months, it's just gonna be Mike and I interviewing each other. So, you like Apple II? I like Apple II.
That's right.
All right. As you can tell, we're a little silly tonight, folks.
It's a grim future, folks.
It really is. Let's see. Oh, okay. So here's a little more recent one from listener Avi. So he has a correction for us for our episode 52, where we talked to Robert Bowditch. That was, of course, the GEOS episode. Robert was talking about the pre-binding delay in OS 10 when you see it saying optimizing system software. And I had, off the top of my head, said that, it still does that. Well, it does still say optimizing system software, but that no longer means pre-binding. So Avi points out that as of 10.5, the dynamic linker was rewritten to use a shared cache, and that made pre-binding no longer necessary. So, and of course it wouldn't work nowadays, and modern code is all code signed for security, so you couldn't do the kinds of things that pre-binding did nowadays. But it was a neat technology for the time, so thanks for that correction. And let's see, we got a bunch of people guessing the secret phrase. We had a number of people actually fire up the Quinn's Ultimate GEOS disk image, so thank you all for that. It was fun to have people do that. I was actually a bit surprised to see how many people did. In fact, listener Chris, I want to call out, actually sent us cool screenshots of my disk image running on his Laser 128EX, which is very awesome. That brings a warmth to my heart, because that's also how I ran it, was on my Laser 128. I think we mentioned last month the Laser 128 had a switch on it that would disable the color burst, so you could get a pure monochrome signal, and so it made GEOS really nice, no color fringe. Let's see, more people guessing the phrase was Buatari. All right, the last one I've got is, a number of people noticed, a number of people tried to load up the GEOS disk image in Virtual 2, and discovered, as I had said on the episode, that if you try to do that, your mouse won't work neener, because the driver that is installed on that disk image for the mouse is for the 2C family of machines. So Virtual 2's 2E mouse emulation will not have the correct tracking, and we can talk about a little bit about that in the upcoming tech segment. But our listener Adam writes in with a nice little tip. If you turn on relative mouse mode in Virtual 2 under the quick settings, the mouse will actually work a little better even with the wrong driver. So that's kind of neat. The of course proper solution is if you just install the 2E mouse driver, then the mouse will work just fine in Virtual 2. But I wanted to make you all use real hardware, so neener once again. All right, that's all the feedback I've got. Mike, do you have any hiding in your box?
Nope. I'm just enjoying listening to you smack our listeners down. It's great stuff.
Yes, well, if I haven't alienated somebody, either our users or past guests or future guests or something, then I'm not doing my job here on the show. Okay, well, let's roll on into the tech segment then.
Fasten your seat bits and warm up your soldering irons. It's time to talk tech.
So the GEOS episode brought up a lot of questions people had about the mouse, and so I thought I'd do a really quick rundown of the differences between the 2E mouse and the 2C mouse. And this will be old news for anyone who saw my talk on programming the mouse at Kansas Fest this year. But for those of you who were not able to attend, I can do a very, very quick summary of the key differences. So the Apple II, the 8-bit mouse, was originally developed for the 2E, and it was developed alongside the Apple Mouse card. And the idea they had there was, we'll put a dedicated 6502 on this thing, and it will handle all of the mouse for us, and so we don't have to burden the CPU with it. And that was a pretty good idea, which then immediately fell apart when they wanted to make the 2C. So the Apple Mouse card was in development while the 2C was in development at the same time. And so what they ended up doing actually was kind of putting the Apple Mouse card on hold and then developing mouse support for the 2C, and then going back and releasing the Apple Mouse card. So the main difference is that the 2C, of course, has vertical blank interrupts, which, it was the first Apple II to have real vertical blank interrupts. And so they took advantage of that to drive the mouse. But the mouse is controlled by the main CPU. And the problem with that is that it's kind of a lot to ask of the CPU because it's trying to do everything else, right? So in order to reduce the burden of all the mouse tracking interrupts going off all the time, they sample the mouse at only 30 hertz on the 2C. But on the 2E, with an Apple Mouse card, it has its own 6502 right on the Apple Mouse card. So that whole CPU's got nothing else to do. So it can sample the mouse at 60 hertz, which is much better. So that's why the tracking is much different on the two machines. So, if you're writing mouse code, you have to compensate for that in your own code. You have to detect a minor 2C or a 2E, and if so, you have to have or double your mouse tracking speed. And then, you see that in GEOS, where if you try to use the 2C mouse driver in Virtual 2, which is emulating the Apple Mouse card, you get the tracking is all wonky. And that's why that is. So that's a very quick elevator summary of the differences between the mouse on the 2E and the 2C. One is interrupt driven by the main CPU, and one is polling driven by a coprocessor that's on the Apple Mouse card. Hope that answers some questions, and I can link to my mouse talk, which Jason Scott has graciously uploaded to archive.org. So if you want to get even deeper with this stuff, you can see all the sample code and all the slides and stuff that go with Apple II 8-bit mouse programming. We'll link to that in the show notes. Well, that's all I have for this tech segment. Mike, any closing thoughts, or should we wrap this baby up?
Oh, let's take this out back and shoot it in the head.
Well, it's been a fun show. I think we got quick and dirty news and feedback, and we got an awesome interview with David. So thanks again, David, for being on the show with us.
Yeah, that was really great. We got to talk to the developers of a developer of a couple of our favorite Apple II games, and hopefully yours too. So again, thank you, David. Good luck with your with the Dino Eggs Rebirth. I know I'll be buying a copy. And again, thank you everyone for listening. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com. Well, actually, you can't. We don't have a Facebook page, do we? We just post to the Apple II enthusiast group, and that probably makes sense. So, but if you want to yell at us or insult us or anything like that, you can email us at open-apple.net. There's a contact form there, or feedback at open-apple.net.
That's right. And if you have a few drachmas you might want to throw our way to help defer the significant operating costs of the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/openapple. And until next month, I will be playing Short Circuit.
So, Woz, first off, could you describe what's happening in this picture?
Well, the picture looks like myself and Steve Jobs. Might have been Steve Jobs' bedroom in his home, and he's holding something about the size of a blue box, and it's black like our blue boxes were, but I couldn't verify it is a blue box from this picture.
Woz is the first person I met that knew more electronics than I did. And one of the things that Woz and I did was we built blue boxes. They were devices that you could build to let you call anywhere in the world for free. These were illegal, I have to add.
Of all the articles I've ever read in my life, the Esquire article, Secrets of the Little Blue Box, was the one that affected my life the most. I started reading this article of brilliant engineers. They were rebelling against the phone company. I was intrigued about being a part of this little rebellious thing.
The fact that two teenagers could build this box for $100 worth of parts and control hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure, that was magical.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Subscribe to us in iTunes or visit us at open-apple.net, where you can browse our extensive catalogue of past episodes or read our blog. If you like what you've heard today, or even if you didn't, your comments, questions or ideas are always welcome. Send them to feedback@open-apple.net.
Sometimes I say something, and as soon as I say it, I'm like, oh no, that's going to be the blooper, isn't it?